Here's every book I read in January 2025. Now, last month I read 13 books, which isn't a shocker for me because December and January are typically the months where I end up reading the most books because I have the most downtime at my job and in between semesters at school. So I kind of have more energy to put into reading books versus during the rest of the year when I am focused more on school and work. My most read genres were literary, no surprise, historical, which I think is kind of a surprise. I've never really been into historical fiction, and the mood of most of my books were dark and sad, which are my favorite kinds of books. Now let's get into the books I read. I'm gonna do it in chronological order. The first book I read of 2025 was Valley of the Dolls. I finished this on New Year's Day on January 1st. I rated this a 3.5 out of 5. This follows 3 girls as they are growing up in New York, I believe, and they are trying to get their place. They're working jobs, they're being actresses, they're in relationships, and they're also obsessed with little pills. Dolls. I thought it was pretty good for the most part. It is an older book, so it's kind of old-timey, but it was interesting until the end. Next, I read Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, and this was an ARC I received via NetGalley. This was my first 5-star of 2025. So imagine I start off with my second book of the year, January 3rd, I rate a book 5 stars. I think that's impressive, right? That says something good about the year, hopefully. Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil is a lesbian vampire drama book. I didn't think I would ever read another book by this author because I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue and I thought it was extremely overrated. The prose was so boring and flowery, and I just thought that there was so much that I didn't enjoy about Addie LaRue that I would never read another book by B.E. Schwab. And then I got this one, and then I read it, and I literally read it all in one day, I think, and so good. Bones and All. This one, honestly, it's not surprising. It's a YA book. I typically don't read YA. When I do, it always rates low for me. I'm not sure if that's because I've outgrown YA. Bones and All follows Marin, our main character, who is a cannibal, and she is out on this search to rediscover her family and to really discover herself and why she is a cannibal. And while she's traveling, she ends up meeting other people who are like her. I rated this a 2 out of 5 because the story wasn't very believable. There was no real description of how Marin is a cannibal necessarily, and maybe that's because it's YA, so they couldn't really get into the like gory details. But I just felt like it was so flat because of that reason. We didn't get anything of depth, and then there was no character development towards the second half of the book. Victorian Psycho. This is another ARC I received. I believe it's already in motion to become a TV show or a movie. I'm not 100% sure, but that's kind of exciting. I rated this a 3 out of 5. This follows our main character. She's a nanny for 2 kids in this kind of rich house, and she just kind of wreaks havoc on the parents and the other servants the entire time she's there. It's just a very weird, interesting, medievally kind of vibe book, right? I rated this a 4 out of 5. This follows our main character as she is struggling to find her place at her job in a new city, in a new state, away from her family and her situationship, and also she ends up pregnant. So she has all these decisions she has to make, and the weight of all of those decisions take on the form of a black hole. Woo woo. I'm so sad. I rated this a 2 out of 5. So I loved New Animal, and I really thought I was gonna love woo woo, but I didn't. And I know some people will really like it. It just wasn't for me specifically, but that's okay. It follows our main character, Sabine. She's an artist, and she has a new art gallery coming out, and her manager's like, go on live on TikTok more to generate this buzz about your gallery that's opening. And then she's stressed about this gallery opening, and she starts like hallucinating and doing these weird like rituals and stuff. It's interesting in the aspect of seeing what goes into a artist before their performance, but it also was like very far-fetched. The wording of everything was really weird, the storyline was really weird, and then the ending just kind of lost me. Pew. Now, last year I read Biography of X by Catherine Lacey and I loved it. It's probably one of my favorite books of 2024. So I picked up Pew, which she released before Biography of X, and I wasn't as impressed, but I was still impressed. I rated this a 3 out of 5. The writing in Pew, I will say it's the same style of writing, but it was heavier in Pew. It was more of a dense prose than Biography of X. It follows our unnamed, described main character, and they're homeless. One day they're sleeping on a church pew, then church goes into service and people find them there and decide to adopt Pew until they figure out where Pew belongs. And you kind of get this sort of view into society when they don't know what race or gender or where this person came from, and so they're all kind of putting their own prejudices against that person. I think it was a great read. It took me 2 days to get into the beginning of the book, and it's a fairly short book, so it shouldn't have taken me that long to get into it. I still thought it was a really good read. The Rabbit Club. Now this was another arc, and this one I'm very excited for it to be released. It was my second 5-star read of 2025. It is a very The Secret History-esque book. Ali is our main character, and he just started his first year at Oxford, and he is an English literature student, and he has his group of friends that are also studying English lit, but he knows of this secret society and he wants to get in. So he's doing everything in his power, trading off on his celebrity dad status, trading off favors just to get into or to hear more about the society. Wonderful dark academia book, and I am very, very excited for it to be released later this year. In the Absence of Men, and this is another arc I received. This is a book I was sad to rate a 2 out of 5. I think the book was decent. The translation might have been off, and that is what really bothered me while I read it. I just felt like the voices fell flat. The story didn't really intrigue me until about 3/4 of the way in, and then the ending was really good. It was kind of a toss-up. I wanted to rate it a 3, but I just felt like because it took me the majority of the book to really be interested in the characters and the storyline, I decided to rate it a 2. Monstrilio. I was really scared to read this because of how hyped it is by my friends, by people on the internet that I see. So I put it off for a very long time, but I did finally read it, and I rated it a 3.5, leaning towards a 4, but I'm gonna stay with 3.5. I think the most interesting thing that this book did was the use of 4 point of views that wasn't jarring. It wasn't like so hard to keep up and move with the different characters. There's only 4 chapters, 4 point of views, and you have the mother and a wife as she just lost her son, the best friend to the wife, the husband of the wife, and then the monster of the wife and the husband. The premise of the book is their kid just died, and she takes a piece of his body and tries to regrow it to become her son again, but instead it becomes a monster. It was a great show of grief. The 2 middle point of views, the best friend and the husband, I didn't really care for, but the first point of view and the last point of view, the wife and the monster, were absolutely amazing. Madonna in a Fur Coat. This is another one I was so scared to read because once I start seeing a lot of people reading a book and posting about it on Instagram and TikTok, I just know if that many people think it's that good of a book, I'm probably not going to agree with the mass of people. So I put it off for a while. Plus there was like a 2-month wait list on Libby for this book, and I didn't feel like buying it if I didn't know if I was gonna love it or not. A lot of old-timey classic books have a introduction kind of chapter or chapters that aren't necessarily the actual introduction or prologue, but are still setting up everything. And I think in Madonna in a Fur Coat, that introduction chapter is not good. It almost put me off from continuing the book. The voice, more so, of that writing was very different from the second half, the actual book. Madonna in a Fur Coat follows a man who misses a couple days from work, and his coworker goes to see him and sees that he's sick, and the man asks for his coworker to bring him everything in his desk at work, clear it out. And when the coworker does that, he finds a little journal, a diary, and gets permission to read the diary. And then the second half of the book is that diary. It is a story of a man and his Madonna in a Fur Coat. I think a lot of people were describing it as like a great love story, a story that shows wonderful yearning. I didn't really see it that way. Honestly, I didn't really like the introduction chapter, and I didn't really like the second part so much until the last like 20 pages, and then I was hooked and then the book ended. So I think I was leaning towards a 3 until the very end of the book. I like books that have strong endings. The Glutton. Full disclosure, I did see this book on TikTok. I only saw one video recommending this book. Then when I was reading the reviews for this book, I saw people saying like, I'm never trusting those TikTok bitches again. So this might be an outlier to my statement of every book that is hyped on TikTok I hate, because I loved this book. I rated it a 4 out of 5. I was so disgusted and so impressed reading this book. Glutton, it's a historical fiction. It follows the story of a true person whose entire life has been fictionalized for the book. So just the person is real and his ability to eat anything and everything. The entire book is fake except for that character. The book follows he's this young boy, he's a peasant, and then something tragic happens to him and he wakes up and basically he's so hungry, and this group of people take advantage of him and make him eat things that people shouldn't eat so that they can get a buck or two. This book I know for sure I'm going to write a full in-depth review for, so keep your eye out for that. The last book I read in January was Case Study, and I rated it a 2 out of 5. This is broken up in a way where you get informational chapters about this therapist, and then you get notebooks about this person who is seeing the therapist, who is only seeing the therapist because their sister was seeing the therapist and then their sister committed suicide. She thinks that the therapist caused her sister to commit suicide. I think everybody in this book thought way too highly of themselves, and it was a very quick and easy read, but I just did not care for any character. I thought everything that they said was just kind of like out there and ridiculous. The only good thing was that there were a couple sentences that were beautifully written, and then everything else was just blah. So I rated it 2 out of 5. That is all 13 books that I read in January. If I had to highlight any, I would say Madonna in a Fur Coat, The Glutton, Rabbit Club, and Bury Our Bones and the Midnight Soil. Those 4, you should keep your eye out for the 2 arcs, Rabbit Club, especially if you like The Secret History, If We Were Villains, Brideshead Revisited, anything that is dark academia-ish, and then Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil if you are vibing with the vampire vibes that have recently been going on, and then Madonna in a Fur Coat if you like classic romance and yearning, I guess, and The Glutton if you want some sort of grotesque kind of historical fiction. Those are my 4 highlights. Everything else is a kind of a maybe if I would recommend for you to read it. I think it would require me to know a lot about you to recommend those books specifically to you. That is all I read last month. I'm hoping February is also a good reading month. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them, or if you're gonna add any of them to your TBR. Bye!